Welcome guys to another video, and the topic for this video today is RMS Effects. And basically what that means is we are going to be using a random map script to modify the game's data. So if you watched the video in which we made the map Texcoco, we saw a short preview of that when we modified some certain resources in the game to enable monuments to grant a resource trickle to the player that controls them. And if we unpause the game here, we can see that that's a very similar case here. We have a monument that's controlled by the red player, which is me, and it's generating resources at a different rate. We can see that the food and wood are increasing rather quickly, the gold is increasing a bit slower, and the stone is increasing a bit slower than that. And if we look at the code of that map, we can see that when we are modifying a resource with the command effect amount, we can select each resource and have a different rate at which it will generate that particular resource. So for example, if we have a base game here and we enable our food trickle, we can set it to 3. Same with wood trickle. We can set the gold trickle to be slightly less than that at 2, and we can set the stone trickle to be even less than that at 1. So the recent January update has greatly expanded the capabilities of these RMS effects for Definitive Edition. And we're going to be going over some applications as well as some limitations for that. So to preface everything, first we need to have some reference material. So if we're going to be modifying the game's data, we are going to be needing the advanced Genie editor to reference a lot of our stuff from. So in case you don't know where that is already, if you go into your games directory where you have it installed, go into the tools, Advanced Genie editor is over here, and then in addition to that we need to find in the resources common in the DRS x2 folder, we need to find randommap.def. So among other things, the constants that are in the game, we have the constants for RMS effects. So for example, in order to grant a resource trickle for monuments, we use the effect which was mod resource. And if we go over, mod resource is here. Notice we didn't have to define it up top here because randommap.def is included in every random map script that the game would generate. And the same would go for example, amount monument trickle food. That is also going to be defined in randommap.def, as well as whether you're setting or adding, etc. So as far as I know, this effect mod resource was the only effect that worked prior to the recent update, and as we can see, there's quite a few more effects. And I'm not going to go through everything in this one video because there's basically unlimited possibilities of what you can do with this, but I'll go through a demonstration of how these things can be used so you kind of get a good idea of what they can be used for. So the first thing to know about RMS effects is that they can either be applied globally to all players in the game, or they can be applied to Gaia only. There's no way to single out a specific player to apply an effect to, and likewise there's no way to apply an effect to a specific civ. It's either all players or only Gaia. So that's one of the limitations of these effects. But nevertheless, so we can take a look at the effects list here, and we can see in addition to modifying a certain resource, we could multiply a resource, we could affect attributes of certain units in the game, we can modify technologies, we can disable objects, as well as text, and then we can upgrade units as well. So let's jump in and take a look at a bit of a practical example. So if you can't tell already, this civ that I'm playing as right now is the Burgundians. So the Burgundians have the unique unit, which is the Costelier, and this unit has a charge attack mechanic, which in my opinion doesn't really belong in the game. And the same can kind of be said for the unique tech, which is Flemish Revolution. It's pretty much all in when it transforms all of your villagers into, those military units. So given the fact that we can modify the game's data, let's try and think about what we can do to try and change some of this. So if we go into the Advanced Genie editor here, let's look for cost to the air, which is this unit over here. And if we look down here, down below its attacks and armors, we can see that its charge attack parameters are over here. So it has a max charge of 35 and recharge rate of 0.875. Now, the first thing to know about modifying the attributes of units is that we are kind of limited in what we are able to modify. So we have to go over here into attribute constants to see what exactly we're going to be able to modify. And if we keep looking down this list, we can see that charge attack and charge reload aren't really parameters that we'll be able to modify. If the devs ever decided to add those as constants that we could modify, we'd be able to do something with it. But as of now, that's not really possible. But there is something we can do instead. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and switch out the unique unit for this civ. So instead of Costeliers being the unique unit, I want to make the unique unit the Flemish Militia. And that kind of kills two birds with one stone, since the Flemish Militia will still be a useful unit, and you won't have to research this tech in order to sacrifice your entire economy to gain access to that unit. So let's see what we can do. So if we go up into our effects, we can see that we have this effect here, which is upgrade unit. And that basically takes a unit index and changes it to another unit. So we'll try that right away. So first thing to do is we need the constants of the units that we're going to be modifying. So the cost of the air is going to be 1655, so I'll put that right here. Cost of the air 1655. And if I want to upgrade it to a Flemish Militia, we can see that there are 3 units for Flemish Militia. This one is the one that the male villagers upgrade into. This is the one that the female villagers upgrade into. And this one is the one that you'll be able to create from the town center after you would research that tech. So we're going to upgrade it into this one here. So constant Flem. What was that? Was 1663. And if we wanted to change that, we can say effect amount, and that's upgrade unit. We're going to upgrade the cost to the air into the Flemish Militia. And if we go into random map def, when we upgrade units, the value must be 0. So the effect amount command always takes 4 arguments. The first 3 always have to be strings, and the last argument always has to be an integer. And that's the case even if the value represents some object in the game which has a predefined constant. You have to specify that constant number instead of the string that it represents. And then, of course, effect amount commands always have to be inside the player setup section of the map. And the constants, of course, can be defined anywhere as long as you define them before you start to reference them later on. So let's restart our game and see what that has done for us. We can see, if we go to our castle, that the Costelier is no longer an enabled unit. But as we can see, the Flemish Militia is not happening to take its place. And that's because when we upgrade a unit, it transfers pretty much all of the attributes to the target unit, which is the Flemish Militia. And if we take a look at the Flemish Militia, we can see that if we go down, we can see that its train location is not at the castle. So in order to get that Flemish Militia unit to appear in the correct location, we have to change its train location and its train button. So in order to do that, we're going to use the effect, which is set attribute. And in order to modify the attributes of an upgraded unit, we have to use the source unit, which is the cost of the air. So if we go into random map def, we're going to try and find train location, which is over here. We're going to set its train location to the castle. So if we go and check back to the cost of the air, the castle location is 82, so our value is going to be 82. And then a similar thing would go for the train button. So the train button is going to be set to 1. And then train button is over here. So we'll change the train button to number 1. And let's restart and see what that does for us. So now that we're at our castle here, we can see that the Flemish Militia is now an available unit to create at our castle instead of the Costelier. Now, the fact that we now have the Flemish Militia, which is taking the unit spot of the Costelier, can have some kind of balance implications. For example, all we spent was 50 food to get a unit that's basically as strong as the champion, and we can balance it later on. But the next thing I want to do is I want to do a similar thing with the elite unit. So if I go back to the data, and we can see elite cost of the air is 1657. So 1657. And I'm going to need a separate unit in order to represent the elite Flemish Militia. So if I go back to the Flemish Militia, we can see that we have another unit available to us here, which is going to be 1699. And so this one is going to represent the elite Flemish Militia. Luckily, we have 2 units that we can configure the stats independently. I hope that's right. Yeah, that's right. And so this will be Flemish Militia 1, and this will be Flemish Militia 2. So the regular Costelier is going to be upgraded into Flemish Militia 1, and then I'll have a separate one upgrading the elite Costelier into Flemish Militia 2. And then going to make sure that I set the train location and train button of the elite unit to be in the same place. So let's go back to the game and let's restart and see what we have for us. So we are in our castle and we have the regular Flemish Militia, which is nothing new. We've already seen that before. But then let's go up to the Imperial Age. And then we can try and wait for enough resources to get the elite upgrade. And then we can see when we upgrade it, the unit has changed. So since the stats of everything in terms of attack, defense, HP were the same, that hasn't changed at all, but we can see that instead of costing 50 food, it costs 60 food and 25 gold. And if we take a look at the Advanced Genie editor, that's exactly what we should expect, because when the normal villager is supposed to upgrade into this Flemish Militia, that unit's cost is the same as a villager, which is 50 food. And then when you enable the unit to be created at the town center, it's going to be slightly more expensive at 60 food and 25 gold. So I put together this list of all of the different stats for the different Flemish Militia units. So as we can see, all of their attack stats are the same because they're basically supposed to be the same unit, except the train location and button are different, and we've already taken care of those. But we also need to consider that the train time and the costs have to be the same also. So let us tackle these first. So the train time, I want to set at 14. So, and that must be Flemish Militia number 1 is the non-elite. So in a similar way, target the source unit, which is the cost of the air, for the effect to be applied to. And then we need to find train time. Creation time is over here. And I want to set its creation time to 14 so we can match the train time of the elite. So we'll set that to 14, and then we'll highlight it over here. And then we will adjust the cost accordingly as well. So we can adjust the food cost of the unit. So we will say attribute food cost. It's going to be set to 60. And then for gold cost, we will set it to 25. And then that's taken care of. So let's see if that has done what we wanted it to do. So let's go to our castle, and then we can see the cost of the Flemish Militia has increased in food, but we still have not managed to get it a gold cost yet. And if we can see, its training's a bit faster than it was last time we checked. So it looks like the train time is working also. And so we have to take a look at the Flemish Militia's initial gold cost, and we can see that it has no initial gold cost. So basically the effect we applied, which was setting the gold cost, doesn't really work if the gold cost index doesn't exist. But luckily there's a way to add that gold cost index, and that's with the effect mul attribute instead of set attribute. So if we multiply that same attribute, which is gold cost, by -1, that should enable the gold cost to be present. And then after that is enabled, we can then set it to the correct value, which is 25. And then let's restart and see if that worked. So we go to our castle, and we can see the unit now costs 60 food and 25 gold. So multiplying that attribute by a -1 has successfully been able to add the gold cost back in. And now we have our unit. So the next order of business, since we've changed all of these, we set that to 60, we set this to 25. These have been changed. So the next thing I want to do is I want to lower the stats of the non-elite Flemish Militia to be more balanced for Castle Age. Since the elite is pretty much already supposed to be balanced for an Imperial Age unit, I'm going to lower the stats of the non-elite in order to make it a bit balanced in Castle Age. So if I want to lower the hit points from 75 to 60, let's see if we can do that. ATTR hit points, we'll set that to 60. And then modifying attacks is a bit interesting, because if we take a look at the Advanced Genie editor here, we can see that pretty much all units have multiple classes for attacks. So when we're trying to modify attacks and or armors, we need to be aware of what class we're actually trying to modify. So let's say that for our unit here, that I want to decrease its melee attack from 12 to 9, its cavalry attack from 12 to 9, and then against ships, camels, and elephants, I'm going to reduce that from 8 to 6. So knowing that we now know the values of what we want to set to, we need to be aware of what class those attacks are. So if we look, we can see that melee attack is class 4, the cavalry attack is class 8, and that's basically what we're seeing on the side here. Whatever index this is representing the class of that particular attack, and we're going to need this later on. So if I want to modify a unit's attack, I can say modify ATTR attack, and then the value of the attack that I'm setting is going to be the class of the attack times 256 plus whatever value I want to add it to. So it's going to be 9. So if I want to modify the melee attack, I need to set the attack value attribute to 1033. So if I set it to 1033, that should modify its melee attack, and then similarly, I'm going to do the cavalry attack. It is going to be 256 times 8 plus 9 is 2057. And then similarly, for these last three indices, it's going to be 4102, 7686, and 1286 respectively. So we have 4102, 7686, and then 1286. So we've been able to modify the attacks, and let's see if that did what we wanted it to. So let's go over here. And we can see that even though the displayed attack is still 12, we can see that its actual attack strength is quite less than that because it says -2, and we can see the HP has changed also. So in order to change the displayed attack, we have to use another attribute modifier, which is ATTR shown attack. And if we set that to 9, which it's supposed to be, that should look a bit more normal for us. So we can see that the attack value looks pretty normal now, and since we were able to successfully modify the attack class for melee, I think it's reasonable to assume that the other attack classes worked in a similar way, and we can test that later if we need to. So the next thing I want to do is I want to take a look at the town center, and I want to notice that this Flemish Militia unit is still an available unit to be created in the town center after the technology Flemish Revolution is supposed to be researched. So even though we have this Flemish Militia has the train location of the castle, we have to recall that this unit is taking the unit index of the Costelier, which is supposed to go here, and the original Flemish Militia is still having the train location over here at the town center. So we can change that if we need to. So if I want to set the train location for the Flemish Militia instead of the Costelier, I want to set attribute for Flemish Militia 2 to be 0, which you'll never see that in the game, so you'll never see that button anywhere. And then additionally, I want to disable Flemish Revolution as a technology. So I need to figure out what index that is. So I'll go over to the text tab. And we can see that tech is 755. So I'll say Flemish Revolution is 755. And if I want to do something with the tech, I can go over to random map def. And I can see we have disable tech over here. And we have disable tech, disable Flemish Revolution. I mean, we need to make sure we are disabling HETR disable. And then the value argument is going to be the tech ID, which happens to be 755 in this case. So let's take a look at what that does. So here in the game, we can see that Flemish Revolution is no longer an available technology to be researched because we disabled it. And the Flemish Militia unit is no longer an available unit to be made at the town center because we changed its train location to be an object that you can't see in the game. So all that seems really nice, but we have to consider some of the limitations that we have for us. So even though we have been able to modify stats of units, we can still see that when we try to upgrade this unit to the elite, it still says elite cost to the air. Now, if we can modify game's data, we might probably think that we could possibly change all this, but that actually is kind of a limitation, because we can't create new things with RMS Effects. We can only modify what's already here. So since there is no upgrade in the game that has the name Elite Flemish Militia, we can't change that tech ID description to be Elite Flemish Militia because it doesn't exist. In order to get that, you would have to modify the data file that contains all the strings. So you'd have to go over here to wherever your strings are, and then you'd have to add that string in this file in order to have that string available to change the name to if you were changing it in the RMS Effects. So that's one of the limitations. And then same goes for the unit name. They will both be called Flemish Militia because there's no such thing as an Elite Flemish Militia in the string file which the game uses. And then one of the bigger limitations of using an upgrade unit in order to achieve an effect like this is that upgraded units inherit the class ID from their source unit. So if we take a look at what we did, we upgraded a cost to the air into a Flemish Militia. And then the source unit, being the cost to the air, has a cavalry class. So if we were to try and upgrade our unit here, we can see that we researched the armor and it didn't change anything. And if we try the armor for cavalry, we can see that that actually did have an effect. So unit class is associated with a lot of internal variables that the game uses, which is likely why it doesn't transfer and use the target units class. So that's one of the bigger limitations of using an upgrade unit, is that you can't change its class. But with that being said, now that we're aware of what this unit class is, we can try and think about what technologies would affect it and what technologies wouldn't. So, for example, since this is not an infantry unit, it wouldn't be affected by things like squires, but luckily there's a cavalry equivalent to that in husbandry. And since Burgundians don't have bloodlines, we don't have to worry about this unit accidentally getting an extra 20 HP if you research that tech. So basically the only upgrades that it technically misses out on are tracking, which gives it extra line of sight, and then arson, which gives it extra damage versus buildings. And those are two things that we could modify ourselves in RMS Effects if we wanted. So we have an attribute for attr line of sight. And if we go to the data file, Flemish Militia have a line of sight of 5, so we can increase that to 7. And then in the same way for search radius, and we can do the same thing with the elite. And then to compensate for the lack of arson, I can increase the elite unit's attack versus buildings by 1. So I'll say against buildings times 256 plus this, and I'll increase this to 3 instead of 2. So I'll upgrade the elite unit's attack into 5379. So the limitation of the unit class being wrong is kind of unfortunate, but that's the best I've been able to do so far. I mean, I've tried other things, like for example, instead of upgrading the units, we could have tried to enable the object instead. So if we directly enabled Flemish Militia instead of using the Costeliers index to upgrade into, it would still maintain its infantry class. But the unfortunate side effect of using the enabled object, as I stated in the beginning of the video, is that RMS effects are global and they have to be applied to either all players or only Gaia. So if we use the effect enable object, that would enable the Flemish Militia for all civs from the Dark Age, which is quite a bit less ideal than what we have currently. This method we use here of upgrade unit is really important for us to maintain the availability status that the source unit has, so being only available to the Burgundians and only available in Castle Age. And then one other thing we could have tried was, instead of bothering with upgrading units at all, we could have tried something like this. So we could try and change the Costelier's hit point to 0 so it dies instantly, and then try to set the attribute dead ID so it's dead unit to a Flemish Militia, which is this. So if we tried that, then we can see what happens. So if we tried something like this, we can see that the Costelier will die instantly and respawn as this Flemish Militia, which maintains its infantry class. But as we saw, it's kind of awkward to watch the unit die as soon as it respawns. And since it has to respawn in order to become a Flemish Militia, obviously the gather points won't work, which is a even bigger drawback to the method we just went through. So despite having some limitations, we should be able to see that RMS effects have some pretty broad applications and can lead to some really interesting ways to play the game. So I know there's a lot that I didn't go through regarding these RMS effects, and I'll probably make a follow-up video trying to give a few more examples. And then also that has to do with the fact that some of the RMS effects are bugged at the moment. For example, in addition to effect amount, there is this command effect %, which is essentially supposed to do the exact same thing as effect amount, except it's supposed to divide the value argument by 100, which allows us to obtain decimal values. But that currently doesn't work at the moment, so whenever that ends up getting fixed, I'll be sure to cover that there. And then finally, if you would like to see some written documentation about RMS effects and how they work, this is the most useful guide I've come across, and it has mostly to do with the context of scenario design, but a lot of the same methodology can be transferred over to random maps as well. And with that, I think that's about all I have to say for this video, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.